Hello, listeners and viewers. It's that time again, huh? First up, I want to express my sincerest gratitude to all of you. The werewolf video from last time? Yeah, that blew up. Well, blew up, I suppose, is relative. It's pushing 300 views. There's some YouTube channels out there where if I said, my video got 300 views, they'd be like, I'm so sorry for your loss. But to me, it's a huge deal. You guys mean the world to me. I sat down, I did the writing, I did the narration, and 300 of you tuned in and listened to it? That's massive. Thank you so much. Next, you might notice I seem a little bit more animated today. I'm not sure how many horror YouTubers also have a VTuber model up and ready to go, but this channel does. It's going to take a little bit of fiddling to get my lion right, to get him to the point that he renders and bakes and makes clean output in, a meaningful amount of time, but all of the tech knowledge seems pretty sound. He's a little taxing to render, and on this channel right now, today, it is a one lion and one computer operation. I'm piping him through Blender with an add-on called Images as Planes, and it's kind of awesome. Look at me. I got dynamic lighting here in my study of Doom. My main has sparkles in it, and that's pretty badass if I do say so myself. Those render times just don't really work for a full narration yet. So for now, let's think Tales from the Crypt. Your lion dad here is like the crypt keeper. He pops in, says some stuff, and then we get on with the episode. If you guys really go crazy down in the comments down below, I might torture my computer for the full 40 or 50 hours it takes to render a full narration like this. So you know what to do if you want more Lion Dad. Get your friends, get in the comments section, and go riot. And of course, the lifeblood of any YouTube channel is likes and subs. Getting my licks in with the algorithm, they're going to make this show more viable as a day job. So make sure to smash those buttons if you're enjoying what you're listening to. Alright. My mandatory pandering is out of the way. Let's get into the meat of tonight's episode. Tonight, we have an original story about Catherine and a cursed book. It begins as a boring tale about a mild-mannered librarian, but that very quickly goes off the rails. She discovers this ancient tome. And who doesn't love a good read? Since we are a horror channel here at Lion Dad Storytime, listener discretion is always advised, Catherine is going to find herself in increasing peril as the narrative ramps up. Using magic has a cost to both body and soul. So let's dive in and see how she handles this dusty old book, shall we? Part 1. A Slow Day. Catherine was bored to tears today. Rain fell in heavy, drenching drops as distant thunder softly shook the building. The lights flickered slightly, but thankfully didn't go out. She was leaning, arms crossed, one eye on the dreary gray world outside, and one on the old white plastic body microwave that was as old as she was. It was slowly turning a cheap cup of soup. To call it soup was generous. It was salt water with a few processed protein chunks in it. She worked as a librarian in a small town, and had done so in this sleepy town, in this sleepy county, for 10 years now. The pay was alright, and she got to be alone with her thoughts and with her reading as much as she wanted to. For an introvert, it wasn't so bad. But today was going to be incredibly boring. Nobody was going to come in here during a rainstorm on a weekday. No kids for several hours, as school was still in session for another 3 hours or so, and there would likely be no adults using the library computers to print a resume. Finding employment was secondary to not getting washed away. She was snapped back to reality by the ding of the analog knob of the machine. She took a seat at the front desk and began to eat her soup with a plastic spoon. Nothing to shelf, Nothing to put up, nothing to sort, not a soul stirred in this building. She'd already vacuumed the floors for the third time this morning. And from the looks of her computer, very few people had overdue books. She'd already called the ones who were indicated as overdue by her database software, and 2 of them had hurried through and apologized in the early morning rain and returned their books. Those were already put back up, and the rest of the overdue books, well, those had gone to voicemail. She probably wouldn't hear from them until Monday. As she struggled to be productive, her left hand bumped into something. There was a book on her desk. Shocker, I know, for a library. But this one was weird. It was made of rich brown leather bindings with metal reinforcement on the cover plates and a spine of what looked to be coated in brass or maybe gold. The book was heavy as she held it and examined it. Now, where had this come from? She cracked it open, looking for a title, an ISBN, or, importantly, a checkout card to indicate it was library property. There were no such identifiers within the covers of this book. Special collections, maybe? She disregarded her soup and got out her keyring, letting it jingle as she walked this heavy tome into the locked-up section at the back of the first floor. The Special Collections room was a room with no windows and a doubled-up or perhaps tripled-up layer of cinder block construction. There was probably lead in the walls here. At least this place would be safe in the event of a tornado or atomic holocaust. This room held unique books. Plans of historical buildings from around the county. A few original writings from state-level politicians. Some one and only copies of a few doctorate dissertations of decades past. Then Catherine realized a few things. She's never seen this particular book before, and it had no title or indications or filing marks. Which locked-up shelf was she to place it into? Whatever, her soup was getting cold. She laid the book on the center research table of the Special Collections room and made a mental note to deal with this thing after lunch. She turned off the overhead light and locked the heavy mechanical lock of the metal door to this room. She returned to the front desk and took a seat. Nobody had come in while she was in the back of the library. The library was as dead as ever, and its dull gray carpet mirrored the dull gray clouds swirling outside. The soft whisper of cool air through the AC vents fought an unheard war with the pattern of rain in a low-volume argument. Catherine got a bite of soup, and then she felt something on her left arm. There was that book again. She blinked hard this time and examined it. Same book, same thick leather covers, same metal reinforcements to the bindings. Had she goofed up and brought it back with her? This time she was much more deliberate. She marched right back down to Special Collections. Catherine unlocked the door, placed the book on the center research table. She was absolutely sure she did it this time. She looked at it, and then backed out of the room slowly, the way someone would back away from a rattling snake. Catherine killed the lights and closed the door. Then, being super deliberate, she locked the door. Clunk. She walked back down the hall and stopped at the front desk. There it was again, next to her soup, waiting on her. Without sitting down this time, she picked up the book. She looked all around, being absolutely certain nobody was crouched under a desk, or under a computer table, or hiding underneath a reading table, or slithering in between bookshelves. Then she walked the book back to Special Collections. For the third time today, she unlocked the door, opened it, and the book she had just placed on the table 5 minutes ago, it was gone. The only book was the one she had in her hand. She laid it down, walked out of Special Collections, locked the door, and returned to her desk. And the book was there again. Being absolutely certain nobody was punking her, she finally cracked the book open. What in the world was she looking at? Why was this one particular book so hell-bent on bothering her otherwise peaceful life? She turned the first 2 yellow cover pages and hit text. It seemed that the printed letters were done with some sort of typesetting. Maybe a printer, maybe a typewriter, maybe a printing press. They weren't handwritten, but weren't laser crisp either. That gave her some indication that the book was, at a minimum, a few decades old. From times before laser printers became the standard, with their super crisp black text on bright white paper. She read for a moment. Maybe there would be a clue in this book as to why it is bothering her. As she did so, she ended up dropping her plastic spoon. This book was about her. It outlined her day, the soup, the teleporting tome that was now bothering her, the rain, the outfit she had picked out this morning, and described everything right up to this moment. Up to and including her dropping her spoon in fixation, and it even predicted her next action. Catherine, distraught with what she had just read, her heart leaping in her throat, slammed the book shut. She did precisely that. What in the hell? She adjusted her black frame reading glasses. She raked her blonde hair away from her face. Catherine stood and walked and took deep breaths, trying to fight off an oncoming panic attack. As she circled the library, pretending to tidy up, mostly just squaring up a children's book or two, and shoving some cushioned wooden chair back under the same table in the same position several times, she eventually gave up and returned to her desk. Catherine sat back down with a long sigh. She slid the strange book around a few times. She flipped it over, examined it, and then finally, she threw out her cold soup in the little employee lounge. There was a small table and a vending machine in here. And there, on the plastic laminated table that used to be red, but whose wear spots had started to turn to brown, there was the book. Catherine could see the front desk from here. She blinked hard and rubbed her eyes. There was clear line of sight to where she left the book at the front of the library desk, and another line of sight to the employee break table through the doorframe. So, she leaned on the doorframe and turned her head. Book on her work desk, turn her head, book on this table in the employee lounge. She walked into the employee lounge and picked up the book. Then she scrambled back to the doorframe. She looked at her desk. No more than a second, maybe two, had passed. The book on her desk was gone. She sighed, frustrated, and returned to her desk. With no other evident option, she opened the book again and began to read. This time, the book anthropomorphized itself. It's like it was speaking directly to her. I'm sorry for startling you, but you seemed bored. And I most certainly am bored. It's Friday. If you're down for a game, take me home with you over the weekend. I bet I'll fit in that messenger bag you towed around. If I freaked you out too much, there's a $20 bill on the next page. Simply turn the page, take some cash as an apology for the wasted soup, close me, and ask me to leave. I'll go bother someone else, and you can dismiss all of this as work stress. Or something akin to road hypnosis. Job hypnosis, if you will. If you'd like to continue playing with me, however, keep reading after taking the cash. Catherine flipped the page. Sure enough, someone had folded a $20 note and used it as a bookmark. She glanced around for a long while before pocketing the money, feeling like she just committed the heist of the century. She considered her options. All of this was just so surreal and dreamlike. But it was a boring Friday afternoon at work, and she just had to be here, almost statuesque behind her library desk, just in case somebody needed to use the library resources, even though she knew deep down nobody would. So, she read again. This book, by far, was the most interesting thing today. Oh, splendid! I'm glad you decided to keep going. I'm not some prank by your co-workers or a library patron. This is all a one-on-one dialogue. Yes, dialogue. I'm, among other things, psionically active. In simple terms, I can read the impulses from your brain. The electrical signals that make up your thoughts. Should you pass me to someone else, this entire book content would be different. Catherine blinked for a moment. Then she glanced back down at the page. There was a little bit of a chill in her spine, but she tried to shrug it off. Naturally, she felt a compulsion to test the book, and went through a series of things. Your favorite color is blue. You're thinking about the number 7 right now. You're thinking about your favorite brand of wine, and yeah, even though it's $8 from the grocery store, it is pretty good. This just unsettled Catherine a little more. The book seemed to be legitimate. Now you're thinking about that VHS tape from The Ring. How the creepy kid was a psychic and did, what was it called? Thoughtography? No, The Ring was from Japan. Nin Sha is what they call it. this psychic phenomenon of burning images to film and other media. Anyways, yeah, she did do that to make the tape, and yes, you're not too far off, but I'm far less hostile than Samara. The book's joke got a chuckle from Catherine. It was doing its best to disarm her. Clearly it had a sense of humor. Now, reading your mind is not the full extent of my capacities, of course, because if this was just thought stuff, there would be no cash in your pocket. I'm more capable of influencing the material world than you might imagine. Let's see. Reading your mind seems to indicate that you've seen Aladdin, the 1992 one. Phenomenal cosmic powers. Itty bitty living space. It's kind of like that. Think of me as sort of a spell book. I make magic happen. Not like in a ritual hocus-pocus way, but in a narrative way. Reading one of my stories is tantamount to casting a spell. You should bring me home this weekend and try it out. I'm bored, you're bored, let's do some magic together. I have a good feeling about you. Catherine hesitated for a moment at that. Her face crinkled up at what she just read. She reread the paragraph before looking forward, not so sure of what to make of the strange book's offer. Every instinct in her wanted to ask, what's the catch, and why me? Why you? Because you work in a library, and I can sense some elevated capacity about you. You're surrounded by books. You make order out of chaos, but there's more to you than that beneath the surface. We don't have real wizards with real magic and real discipline these days, and today, as I was looking for someone to play with, you're the closest I could find. Just think about it. Consider it. As for the catch, well, of course, playing with magic can be dangerous. Oh, by the way, that family coming in, they want to return some movies and check out some different kids' DVDs. Also, it's been 4 hours and the rain has stopped. I might have already played with your brain a little bit to pass the time. Sorry. Just then, Catherine was pulled from her trance-like state as 2 kids bust through the front swinging doors of the library, followed by 2 parents in raincoats. She set the book aside on the front desk and looked up. After chatting with the parents for a bit and ringing up the return and the checkout for a few kids' movies, Catherine looked back away from her computer screen and the library database software. The book was nowhere to be found. The rest of her workday was a blur, as it was only 20 minutes until it was time to shut up shop. She made her final checks, reshelved books and DVDs that had just come in, wrote some quick reports for the week, omitting the strange book, of course, locked up, shut the library lights off, armed the security alarm, and went home. Returning home, Catherine realized she had forgotten to stop by the grocery store. Her sister, Maggie, was set to come by tomorrow. With her sister would be her brother-in-law, Jason, and their 2 kids, Jeffrey and Sophie. There was always a tinge of sibling rivalry there. Catherine made a very good apple pie. She might not have succeeded in starting a family yet, but at least she had her career and her knowledge, and she was proud of her knowledge. And one facet of her knowledge was her ability to cook, her culinary prowess. She muttered under her breath. It had rained on and off all day. She could see it through the windows. And as she stepped out of her kitchen to make a quick grocery store run, the rain picked back up again. She didn't really want to go out in the rain to buy a bag of apples for this pie. It bothered her. It was like a needle in her brain. It was a little thing, but her carelessness of forgetting to stop by the grocery store, it just rubbed her the wrong way. Well, whatever. Catherine started to wind down for the day. She did some laundry, she sipped a little red wine, and she made a mental note to absolutely get up early and go hit the grocery store at 7 a.m. when they open tomorrow. She could pull that off and make the pie and get all of her other dishes cooked before her sister's family arrived. Then she saw the book on the kitchen table. Part 2. Apples. It was an instant magnetic pull. Catherine approached the book and ran a fingertip over it. She took the book to her living room and sat back in the recliner. Then she considered her evening plans. She got up, and using her phone, turned on some soft Bluetooth music over the speakers in her living room. She poured another glass of wine, then returned to the book. She opened it curiously. Before the next chapter began, the book had italic text, almost like a foreword or a prior quote. Then the chapter number was bolded with a big elaborate symbol. The chapter title was 1, Catherine and the Apple Tree. And beneath the chapter title was a small subtitle text. Let's do some magic. Apples are easy enough. With, of course, a parentheses winky emoji. This got a laugh out of Catherine. She took an alarmingly large gulp of her wine, adjusted her reading glasses, and settled in for an evening with this mysterious book. She turned the page. What transpired over the next several hours was strange and bizarre. The story was one of the most immersive ones Catherine had ever experienced. It was like the book was tapping into her imagination and crossing wires in her brain and making the imagined narrative become real. As though she was setting in the scene described in the book, reading the story that was put forth. She sensed that if she was to let her gaze wander around the edges of the pages, she would see and feel and be able to interact with the world spun up by the narrative. It was well beyond the immersion created by fiction writing. This effect was nothing short of magical or paranormal in nature. Within the story, which was about her, Catherine was thrust into a mix of history and fantasy. She found herself with a magic wand in her hand, grasping it like a weapon. Her clothing was some sort of military uniform, a button-up shirt, and a couple of medals on it with a hard hat on her head. She was kneeling in a trench and could hear bullets whizzing by overhead. Some enemy army was shooting at her and the other characters in the background in this book. Her squad mates were occasionally popping up just high enough in the trench to return fire with either rifles or magic wands of their own. The sky was dark, and it smelled of gunpowder and death and the burning scent of sulfur of something on fire. All around were the sounds of machine gun fire, magic words being yelled with complete confidence causing an echo and reverb in the undertone, and distant artillery strikes. It was like some hardcore war movie scene from World War I, mixed with wizards running around and waving their hands. Then within the story, she saw it. Right there, for anyone brave enough. Maybe 10 feet into no man's land, there was a hill. Not much of a hill, more of a mound. But this high spot in the terrain held the grand prize. Atop this mound was an apple tree, fully loaded with red fruits larger than your fist. It was like the glorious golden rays falling on the impossibly green leaves were a sign from a higher power, painting this fruit tree in the beautiful heavenly beams from God himself. Catherine could almost hear angels sing as she laid eyes upon it. So she knew what she had to do. She steeled her resolve. She got her head down and hugged her magic wand tightly. She silently counted to 3, and then flung herself up and out of the trench, making a mad dash, crouching low as she possibly could. Bullets whizzed past her. Her heart raced as hard as it could go. She could hear every shot break as she zigzagged to the base of this apple tree. Catherine tumbled and threw herself to the base of the tree, seated, back to it, form huddled to its massive stone-like roots, gasping for air. The problem is, she wasn't the only person on the battlefield with this idea. Catherine looked up and saw what could only be an enemy soldier. He was in a uniform of different style and pattern to her own, helmet pulled low, eyes barely visible behind iron sights. He clearly had made a similar dash to the same apple tree. Catherine found herself looking down the barrel of a rifle. And when she thought all hope was lost, the wand that she had subconsciously pointed at this enemy soldier discharged all on its own. It was sort of a jangling, puffing sound. The enemy soldier's eyes widened as he erupted into consuming blue flames all over his body. The fire bellowed and danced, casting long tongues into the sky, as though someone had just ignited an entire swimming pool full of gasoline. The smell of burning flesh invaded Catherine's nose as the soldier, clearly dying from this inflicted injury, managed to squeeze the trigger of his rifle one last time as he was engulfed in flames. A shot rang out, causing Catherine's ears to ring and go silent for a moment. She felt a burning pain in her left shoulder, as if someone had just prodded her with a hot iron fireplace poker. Blood began to ooze from the glancing wound, as the enemy soldier was entirely enveloped in flames, his rifle falling with a metallic thud among a pile of black and charred bones. Catherine held onto her wound, able to understand, if not vocalize in her inner monologue, that it was just a flesh wound. If she could keep pressure on it, she could be okay. The bullet had only scraped her skin. All in all, she'd gotten off lucky. She held her form to the tree, she exhaled her air, sucked in her stomach, and then stretched with the grace of some sort of stork in reading glasses. Then she plucked a massive apple from the lowest branch using her good arm. As she took a bite, the world seemed to melt away. As Catherine, the real Catherine, finished the short story, she blinked hard. Her shoulder ached. Sympathy pains? Oh my god, no, there was blood all over the white t-shirt she changed into. Her eyes widened as she laid the book down on the end table next to the chair. She made her way to her bathroom and removed the shirt. On her left shoulder was a large gouge, like she'd been seriously cut or shot with a glancing bullet. She began to instinctively wash this wound, treating it with warm, soapy water, then alcohol and gauze from her bathroom medicine cabinet. She debated on going to urgent care to get stitches. Eventually, the bleeding stopped. But she knew, even in that moment, her shoulder would have a scar. She emerged from her bathroom, her face drained of expression and color, staggering in shock back to her own living room like she'd just escaped a battlefield. And something out here smelled nice. The change in smell was a shift, an intrusion. It overwrote the scent of blood, alcohol, and gunpowder that had offended her nostrils. She cast her gaze to the kitchen. Atop her counter were half a dozen of her famous apple pies, made to her recipe, but as if done by the hands of a perfectionist pastry chef. The tops were carefully scored, glazed with sugar, and browned under an oven broiler to give them that shine. She rubbed her eyes in disbelief. Then she returned to her reading chair and caught sight of the book. Catherine flung it back open to the spot where she'd been reading, looking for some kind of explanation. The next page was a chapter afterword, done in much the same italic font as the foreword of the chapter. See, you survived your first magical outing. Wasn't that fun and exciting? I bet you felt like you were really in the scene. Don't you give me that furrowed eyebrow about nearly dying. You handled yourself like a champion. Also, I'm aware that you've noticed the pies, but have you looked at the window at your back lawn? This was the end of the day. It was twilight, almost nighttime. Suddenly, the air conditioner came on. Catherine had not heard the thermostat click. In a random gush of cool air from the vents, the curtain to the back window shifted in her living room. And it was the only curtain that moved. Squinting at it, it seemed to sparkle slightly, as if it was begging for her attention. She walked to the curtain, still clutching the book in the hand of her hurt left arm. She pulled back this dancing curtain with her right hand, and she gasped. In the backyard of her house, normally a sparse thing, with a couple hundred square feet of half-dead Bermuda grass, there sat a brand new apple tree. New as relative, it hadn't been there before, but the tree itself was an old one, every bit of 20 or 30 years in age, towering up and loaded with huge ruby red apples. The book had ensured that she never needed to worry about fighting the weather and the grocery store lines again. She'd won that battle forever in trench warfare. Catherine cast her gaze back down at the book, seeking an explanation. This was a fun first chapter, but you should put me down and get some rest. I'll be here when you're ready to go for another round. Catherine flipped the pages, and all of the rest of the pages of this book were blank. Hundreds of them. Catherine spent several minutes in shock, and then realizing there was nothing else printed here, she gave up. For a moment, she almost laid the book back on the end table. Then she recalled that family was coming over tomorrow. Catherine took the book to her bedroom, reached up into the top of her closet, pushed aside the clean linen she stashed for when she did laundry day for her bed, and she stuffed the book behind a blanket and a sheet. After covering the book, she closed the closet door. She didn't precisely know what this weird book was capable of, but she knew for sure she did not want her sister's kids getting a hold of it. Part 3. Family Ties. The next day came, and Catherine's shoulders still hurt. She cleaned the wound again early in the day. Then she got her hands cleaned up and prepared a huge meal. There was roast chicken, some rice cooked in butter with vegetables, some green bean casserole, some pork chops baked in barbecue sauce, mashed potatoes, gravy, and of course, her signature apple pie. The get-together with her extended family went well enough. She was the cool aunt. She got comments about how pretty the pie was and how "you've really outdone yourself, sis," from Maggie. Eventually the kids went to go play in the backyard. Maggie helped wash dishes while Jason put the uneaten food in Tupperware in the fridge. "I've never noticed that tree in your backyard before, Catherine." Maggie looked out the window at the kids, then to the new tree. "Did you get into landscaping or something?" "Oh, yeah. I just thought it was sort of bare back there. I learned it from a book." Catherine bent the truth a little, but the story held water as something a librarian would say. "Well, maybe you can help us out in a few months. We're buying a new house. Nice neighborhood, not so far from here. Jason got a raise at work last year, and we've been wanting a place with more space for the kids. It would be nice if you could do your," and Maggie wiggled her fingers at the tree, "magic on the lawn. I've never had much of a green thumb, you know." This got a smile from Catherine. Deep down, she felt just a little bit of jealousy towards her sister. No doubt she loved her, but there was always this stupid sibling rivalry, this need to outdo each other. While Catherine had been nose in the books and made straight A's in school, went to college, and still needed to borrow money from the bank to cover her dorm and her car note to commute back and forth from school, Maggie had been their parents' second run at raising a kid. She had a college fund waiting on her at 18, which she took, but converted to pure cash, marrying Jason right out of high school. His family owned the local bank, so a job there was pretty much guaranteed. "Oh, yeah? That's great. I'll see what I can do for you two." She also knew that deep down this was just a humble brag. It wasn't about needing any sort of landscaping. It was about wanting to flaunt the new house and the perfect life. The conversation went on for a bit. Talk of the new neighborhood, new school district. When the conversation shifted to Catherine, she was aware that her work with the library was sort of boring. She'd always loved books and learning, but her 9-to-5 job was basically slightly different variations of the same day for the last 10 years. Eventually the conversation died down, and the sister and the family left. Catherine sat alone and poured herself a glass of wine. Her head was still reeling from the book. The super real narrative, the apple tree, the lost time, the $20, the gunshot wound. After an hour, when she was sure her sister was really gone, she went and fetched the book from the hiding spot in the closet. It was still there. She opened it up, pulling the cloth ribbon bookmark out of the folds of the pages and picking up where she left off. New text had appeared. "I know what you're thinking. Magic has a cost. Your life is a little boring, but you shouldn't compare yourself to your sister like that. Boring can be a good word. If you really insist on having me shake up your living situation, wait for an opportunity. Wait for a chance to change it yourself. Then pick me up, and we can work out a cost and an effect. It'll be less stressful on you that way. And it'll be more believable to anybody who snoops on your sudden windfall." The book continued, seeing what she was thinking. "Yeah, I know you don't want to say it out loud. You don't have to. Your friend is a book. That does sound kind of sad. But I won't judge you for it. I was created as sort of a death trap for would-be grave robbers. For a few centuries, my only friend was a corpse. Not very lively company. You have a whole other day in your weekend. Try to go out and meet some people. Live a little. I'll be here when you get back. Most of the people who've used my magic have done themselves in with the first story, rather quickly. Let's not rush this one. I have a good feeling about you. Each use of my magic demands a higher toll on the reader than the last. When the time is right, you know where to find me." Catherine sighed. It didn't bother her so much that she was getting life advice from a book, but more that she was getting life advice from a haunted-ass book. But it was right. She closed it and put it back in its hiding spot. Part 4. Opportunity Strikes. The next few days were like Christmas as a kid. It was like knowing you had some really awesome present under the tree, but had to wait for the day of. Catherine had almost forgotten what the feeling felt like. But every day, when she'd get off from work, she would glance at that closet wistfully. She did try to make some new friends, and even broke her normal patterns to go out with some old college associates for drinks, and some pool at a bar in town. It was tough to not be a huge square, but she was making a concerted effort to remedy her own boredom without resorting to magical aid. A couple of beers and a hangout session. Maybe a phone call or two. Those were magic enough in their own right. Somewhere in this newfound flurry of activity, she caught wind that the head of the state library board was looking for a new assistant librarian. A second in command over the entire library system. That would be a massive promotion. She would get to travel from town to town, check in on each library branch, rather than resign her life to sit at a single desk all day. Plus, there would be new books, new places, new people, and, of course, a bump in pay. Catherine made up her mind. She polished her resume, and she submitted it the next day. And she heard nothing. For days, nothing. For over a week, nothing. With each day that passed, she could feel hope fading away. She'd hyped herself up for no reason. But maybe she could still make it work? Her car got pretty good fuel economy. Her workday ended every day at 5. Maybe she could compromise and drive around the state and try out local parks and local restaurants and be an old maid in her 30s? What was she thinking? Why compromise? She had access to magic, for God's sake. Catherine flung open her closet doors and pulled the magic book down again. She flipped it open to the next page she hadn't read. It was waiting for her in that moment. Now that is a fascinating proposal. Yes, I can make that happen for you. Think about a job and how hiring works. We both know it's all bullshit. On paper, it's your years worked and education and qualifications. But none of that matters if the job you're applying for already has a candidate picked out, and they're just posting the job listing for posterity. Huge waste of everyone's time. And it happens every day. In practice, getting a job is about who you know and who will vouch for you. The skills don't even matter that much. And that's before your resume gets auto-filtered by some AI. The whole system's rigged. But what if you could unrig it? I can help with that. This story will be more intense than last time. It'll be more taxing. But if you really desire this job, go make yourself ready. Hit the bathroom, drink some water, put on some relaxing music, make an atmosphere. Then we can begin. Catherine considered the book's offer. She wanted to ask exactly what she was in for, to which she simply noticed a little 1 in subscript next to the last paragraph. At the bottom of the page, in tiny text that she hadn't noticed before, it replied with, "No spoilers." Fine. She went and did as she was told. The librarian pulled the curtain shut in her house. She lit some candles and set them up around her bedroom. She drank some water, she emptied her bladder, and she got into a set of pajamas at 5 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. Then, with her already quiet life basically shut down, she turned the page. Part 5. We're Librarians. As she lay face down on her bed, pillow beneath her belly and chest, books sprawled open upon the bed, a new chapter appeared. Same bold typeface as before. Chapter 2. Catherine in the Library of Madness. As she began to read, the chapter was once more about her. The effect was a little more familiar this time, but it was also way more intense as she made her way through the chapter. A minute or two into reading, and she had a sense that she was falling through clouds, as if she was slipping into a world as the book presented it. and this time it was almost as if the book in the real material world had vanished. She soon found herself in a surreal world. The book had a voice and was narrating her actions. In the real world, her body was limp and trance-like, almost fixated, eyes rolled back in her head, hands shaking above the pages. Catherine found herself in a library. Not her library, a confusing one, a massive one. The place was composed of stone and marble, and each of her footfalls caused an echo to bounce off of the cavernous walls that were far too distant to see in the darkness. She was aware that somewhere in this library was a magical artifact, something called a Tome of Favor. The book was rumored to emit a glowing golden light that could permeate your very mortal soul. Those who read it gained a mix of favor and wisdom and charisma beyond their years. And so Catherine began to walk. She noticed that in her hand was a small ceramic bowl, and in that bowl sat a single lit taper candle. Beyond the pool, a feeble candlelight cast by the flame of the white tapered wax pillar sat only near impermeable darkness. Casting her gaze upward, Catherine noticed that each of the bookshelves must have been 50 or 60 feet tall. Rows upon rows upon rows of them, spanning across all of recorded human history and mystery. Each shelf was outfitted with a rolling ladder and a rail system. Beyond some of the shelves, the cracks in the domed ceiling of this library were visible, revealing a neon purple plasma sky. No doubt made of some kind of horrible radiation or magical radiation that would prove fatal to anyone in this place who stepped out of the sanctuary of the library. And beyond the glowing purple radiation were formations of stars, none of which were anything Catherine was familiar with. She definitely wasn't in Kansas anymore. Her task felt daunting, but she was at least grateful not to be in a war zone this time. A slight smile crossed her face as she searched for any approximation of a catalog, or any sort of ordering system for the shelves of books. Perhaps her relief was premature, for in the sprawling darkness, over her right shoulder, she could hear what was almost like the clop of large hooves over the stone floor. Each footfall was massive, sending an echo that reverberated all throughout this impossibly large structure. Because, of course, what would a labyrinth be without a minotaur to guard it and devour would-be plunderers of the labyrinth's secrets? She furrowed a brow, resisting the urge to speak or cry out. No doubt any speech on her part would instantly give her position away to the hunting, snorting beast that still sounded far off with its heavy breath and plodding hooves. The slightest hint of cynicism invaded her thoughts as she walked. She remembered her days as a child watching Wishbone on PBS. The cute show with the dog who went on adventures and encouraged kids to read. It probably influenced her career choice as a woman in her 30s now. She kept thinking that Wishbone didn't have to deal with shit like this. After checking the catalog system plate on the fourth shelf, she understood now. This library was ordered by concept. On some level, she wondered if the magical book she had grown so fond of in recent weeks originated in a place like this. She was at L for love at the moment. And entire volumes sprawled further than her sight could see. Books of love potions, romance novels, relationship advice. This wasn't it. She needed favor. F. And so she proceeded down the rows, following the alphabet. After several minutes, she made it to the H's for hope. She was on the right path, but those hooves sounded like they were coming closer. No, that snort, that was far too close. She could practically feel the beast's hot breath on her back. She checked her pockets and found a small, soft-flame cigarette lighter. It seems it would be possible for her to put out and then relight her candle. She wasn't sure if the Minotaur could see in the dark, but she decided to risk hiding rather than starting up a straight-up chase with it right now. Catherine dipped into the row of shelves, for books on heartbreak. A whole flurry of relationship gurus peered back at her from printed covers, giving a sort of odd gallery effect. Then she blew out the candle and sat in near pitch-black darkness. After what was, in reality, only seconds, but felt like hours, with her heart hammering in her chest, a set of hooves clopped by. Catherine was squatted down, body folded, hiding between the books and the rolling ladder a few feet from the end of the wide bookshelf ending. She had wedged herself in there, effectively shelving herself into the collection of heartbreak books. Catherine got a partial look at the beast as it strolled through. It must have been 10 feet tall. From her vantage point, she could see to its knees and the tip of its tail swishing around as it patrolled the same hallway and the same shelves she just walked down. It did stop for a moment and sniff the air after a minute. Then, holding her breath as to not make a sound, she could hear the hoofs turn, come back towards her, hesitate for a moment, and then continue walking back in the direction they'd come from. After several minutes, they sounded distant again. She dislodged herself from her hiding spot and sparked the lighter up as quietly as she could, relighting the candle before continuing on her way. She kept her head down and moved with a practiced library silence now. It was the scramble of a librarian who had been in a quiet place for years, but who needed to be someplace right now without disturbing the peace. It was a quick and practiced scramble. Catherine quickly got to the F's. As she rounded the corner into the row labeled Favor, she could hear those hooves turning and growing closer once more. It was like the Minotaur had stopped and pivoted. Catherine cast her gaze up. Some 30 rows up, there was a glowing golden tome. A big one. It was well above her head. The height made her a little bit dizzy, as if she was looking at a roller coaster. But there was a ladder attached to the shelf. She grabbed it and slid it as quietly as she could a few feet to square up with the glowing golden tome. As she did so, though, the ladder made a squeak of old metal on its railing system. That prompted a heavy snort and a roar from not so far behind Catherine, along with a rapid set of hoof falls. Well, that was her cue. Time to go. Catherine scrambled up the ladder, climbing as quickly as she could with the low light. She made it 15 or 20 feet up. As she did so, the Minotaur rounded the corner. He was like a bovine tank, clad in shining white steel armor over thick black fur. He looked up, saw Catherine ascending the rolling ladder, snorted, and then ran the ladder with his entire body weight, knocking it with his horns. The sudden jolt flung Catherine off and onto a nearby shelf. She screamed in alarm as her entire world swirled with vertigo. Fortunately, she managed to get a handhold on one of the shelves. She scurried up and took a seat on the shelf, casting her gaze down at the massive bovine defender, who was almost able to reach her. Her candle went out as it fell and rolled across the floor. But even in the super dim ambient light, she could make out the bovine's glowing red eyes and shining metal armor. Catherine had to hold her chest tightly to try to slow her heartbeat down. The Tome of Favor was so close to being within reach, and yet it was so far away. A few more shelves. Maybe she could climb another 6 feet and fetch the book. The Minotaur was scratching his hooves across the floor, snorting hot, fetid breath up at her, pacing around. Catherine considered her precarious situation and just how cornered she was, and then she tried speaking. She raised her voice. "Hey, can you speak?" She didn't avert her gaze from the Minotaur, and he stopped for a moment. Then his voice came out, deep and resonant. "Of course." Conversation lowered Catherine's guard ever so slightly. "So what is your deal, dude? Why are you trying to kill me?" The Minotaur considered her question. "I'm just doing my job. I'm a librarian. I can't let someone like you come in here and plunder these mysteries." That got a nervous laugh from Catherine. "Would you believe me if I told you I'm also a librarian, and I'm just here to read one of your books, not to steal it?" "No shit." She could perceive the Minotaur's guard lower, ever so slightly. His expression seemed to soften. He still looked menacing, but he was more menacing because he was a hulking armored bull man, and less menacing because he was a huge hulking armored bull man who wanted to kill her. As sure as I'm here, I'm trying to move up in the world, in my world. If I can read, and then she pointed up as she spoke, that one, the Tome of Favor, I can persuade the people up the chain of command from me to make me a sort of librarian of librarians. Then, I can be sure the whole world, or at least my corner of it, can access our shared knowledge, and maybe make it a better place. She thought for a moment. Then, to underscore her point, she fetched her own library ID card. It usually hung around her neck. It was a laminated thing. She tossed it down to the Minotaur. Look for yourself. This is my ID. I'm the real deal. It even has a watermark that would make it hard to counterfeit. Unlike Catherine, the Minotaur could, evidently, read in the dark. He contemplated the card for a moment. It was sort of like he was a massive bouncer at a nightclub, carding her. He looked back and forth from the photo ID to the woman perched on the shelf above his head. Her photo ID matched up with how she looked. Hair slightly different, of course, and more lines on her face now, but she was the same person. After a long pause, he answered.
Very well, fellow librarian. I'll help you.
He brought the ladder back over to the shelf. He didn't leave, though. He stood back, arms crossed over his chest. Clearly still some distrust in him. Catherine cautiously got back on the ladder. She ascended and fetched the tome. It was hot on her hand as she made contact with it. The tome seemed to hum with an unseen force, like it was vibrating. She clasped the book in her arm, and then made her way down the ladder. She hesitated for a moment before her feet touched the floor. You're not gonna, eat me or something, are you? This got her a huge laugh from the Minotaur in response. His voice bellowed around the empty library.
You'd be surprised how often people ask me that.
If you were some sort of thief set on plundering this library, my answer would be yes, without hesitation. But you're harmless enough. Catherine allowed her feet to touch the floor after that reply. The bull handed her back her ID. I assume you can't read in the dark. His red eyes glowed slightly in the dark environment. It was kind of like having a pair of LEDs looking down at her. He reached into a pouch on his belt, and he pulled out something akin to a brass hurricane lantern. He sparked up the light source. The lantern didn't produce an orange flicker like Catherine had expected. Instead, it produced a ghostly blue light that was almost haunting in nature. He set it down on the floor. I've heard about the contents of that particular tome. It packs a punch. I'd be careful. Catherine smiled at the irony of a book packing some sort of magical punch. Then she had an intrusive thought. She had an urge to pet the Minotaur. She couldn't help herself. She lifted a hand. May I, once, for the life experience? This got her a huff. His hot breath caused the curl to disappear from her hair. Then, after a moment, he leaned down. His thick black mane was almost blue. Briefly. She pet the Minotaur. His hair was coarse. It was kind of like petting a bear, or the wire brush of a barbecue grill. Sorry, I just kinda had to know. Right. Anyway, mortal, get your knowledge. Carefully. Catherine took a seat right there next to the shelf. She didn't want to alert the beast by trying to leave with the book. She cracked open the glowing tome and looked inside. As she did so, her eyes went wide. Her vision washed out to impossible white, completely overwhelmed, like a flashbang, as incredible heat washed over her face and neck. It was like sticking her entire head into a jumbo light bulb, or a welding rod without a mask. As her consciousness faded, she heard the Minotaur scoff. That's not careful at all. And so the story ended. Catherine spilled back into the real world. She ached. She felt like she was about to vomit. All of her joints burned. Her eyes stung from all the salt water in them. She couldn't move. Her entire body felt like it was made of lead, pinned down to the bed in her bedroom. She lay sprawled right next to the open book, her hand and the side of her face planted on one of the open pages. The book wrote a few more words that flickered in her blurry field of vision. I've ran that scenario a dozen times over the centuries. You're the first one who tried to make friends with the Minotaur. Well played. Now, rest. We don't want you breaking any more than you already are. And at that, Catherine passed out. At some point, the candles she'd lit had gone out on their own. Maybe the book had blown them out. In either case, she sank into abject darkness. Part 6. Advancement. Catherine woke up the next day. It was almost noon on Sunday when she came to. Her muscles all burned like she'd just run a marathon. It felt like she couldn't quite catch her breath. She cast her gaze back at the book. It was still open nearby on the bed. And it immediately answered her. You made it. Here shortly your phone is going to ring. Make sure it's not on silent. You might want to get some coffee down you and fix yourself up in the mirror. And remember, smile. People can hear that through the phone. Catherine followed the book's advice. She started her day hours behind schedule. When she finally got a look at herself in the mirror, her blood ran cold. Her blonde hair had started to gray, and there were multiple new lines on her face that hadn't existed before. She raised a hand to the reflection in disbelief, making sure it was really her on the other side of the looking glass. There was more, though. New knowledge had been burned into her mind. It was like she had done an entire master's degree in a night. She tested at the new knowledge. A question about logistics, or copyright, or interlibrary communication would float to the top of her mind, and she'd instantly have an answer. It was like she was this wellspring of information. The book had done something to her, beyond the wear and tear of her physical form. Then her phone rang. Catherine answered it on the second ring. It was a secretary for the state's library department. The chief librarian for the state had seen her resume and wanted to interview her first thing in the morning. The next day, she breezed right through that interview and got that job. Her new boss was impressed with her reserve of practical and theoretical knowledge and her new ideas. Her new work commute would put her about half an hour longer than it had been prior, having to drive to the next town over, but Catherine didn't mind the ride. She ran a hand along the book that Monday night and opened it to the bookmark. Look at that. You got the job. I don't normally caution people as much as I have with you, but you're one of the good ones. You're going to do great things. But you very clearly still ache. Pumping yourself full of decades of experience and suddenly enthralling an entire job interview board would do that. It might be best to save me for an emergency. Since I've picked you as a host, I can't just up and leave until you're no longer alive. But let's not make that process go any faster than we already have. Catherine boggled. This book had come on so strong, toying with her, wanting to cure her boredom. There was access to anything she could ever want in between those pages. Sure, the stories, they were intense. Sure, they blurred reality and fiction. And she couldn't ignore the harm the book had caused to her as a result of using the magic. It had made 4 hours disappear into thin air on the first reading. On the second, she'd been grazed by a bullet and had been in very real danger. On the third, she might well have been eaten by a minotaur and nearly had her face melted by some ancient arcana. So why the caution now? It answered her. I fear the next reading will be your last. It's hard to put into terms you'll comprehend. I'm trying awfully hard here to do right and defy my own nature. I guess I could spill my origin and purpose if that would satisfy your curiosity." Catherine nodded, then continued to read. "I was made by a wizard in old times, sure. And I do make magic happen, sure. We've both observed that. But I was also made as sort of a trap for his tomb. He built me from a bunch of scraps of really hostile magic, and I won't dare break your mind with the details of all of my components. He did so in a mad frenzy in the last few years of his life, all spiteful and hating the entire world. In short, I was designed as a middle finger to anyone who would rob his tomb. The sort of person who would rob a tomb like that is the sort of person who would ask for a bunch of concubines or $1 million right here, right now. As you might imagine, such a massive ask was instantly fatal. My magic prowess, my fuel, as it were, comes from the consumption of something vital. You've no doubt felt those tally marks inside my front cover. Previous hosts have misused me, and I might have, well, eaten them in response. It's kind of what I'm made to do. But you've kept your cool. You haven't asked for anything egregious, you've played it safe, and you've calmly handled the challenges I've put forth. They've hurt you, sure, but you've lived through them and turned your life in a positive direction and come out better on the other side from all the trials I've put forth. I don't particularly want to snack on your soul like I have with my prior readers. With the accumulation of damage you've taken thus far, it's a safe bet that the next time we do this, my narrative might well kill you. And I don't really want that to happen to you. You're nice. My previous readers have been real jerks. But for you, as far as mortals go, I've enjoyed our hangout. If you consider me to be a good book, well, the feeling is mutual. Remember, every time you read from my pages, I'm reading from the depths of your soul in response. This is a two-way transaction. And it's pleasant. I'm glad we're friends." Catherine sat for a moment, strongly considering what the book had just said to her. Then she nodded in agreement. She gave the dusty old tome a thank you, and wiped it down gingerly with non-linting cloth, shining the cover slightly. Rather than hide it in shame in the top of her closet, she put it in a sort of place of prominence in her bedroom, on the top shelf of her personal books. Then she patted the cover in appreciation. At least it had been honest with her. This inanimate object, this inanimate, sentient death trap, as it were, was more human than some of the patrons she'd served at her day job. There had to be some kind of dark humor in there somewhere. Part 7. Crashing Down. For the next 2 years, Catherine went on about her new life. She got to drive all over the state and meet other librarians. She got to fight for funding and make sure every branch of the library system had new books and new equipment. She didn't get to hang out with Maggie and her extended family as much as she would like, as work kept her busy. But several times she would swing through her town on her ride home and meet with them at a restaurant. In her travels, she met people. She dated a few guys, nothing serious, but she kept her options open. They were in the far-flung cities around her state. She got to eat food and see things and learn things she never had a chance to experience before. She got to flex all of her knowledge and all of her experience to keep the library system running like a battleship. There were chunks of her home state that she got to witness through the windshield of her car that she never would have had a reason to go see outside of her job. It was all coming together nicely. It was no longer boring. She was a lifetime away from that analog microwave and that thin, salty soup. It was serene. At least a couple of nights a month, she'd get the old book down and just hang out with it. Not requesting a spell, just keeping it company. It was more like casual conversation with a friend. Her new life was going swimmingly, but of course, it all had to come tumbling down. One day her phone rang as she stepped across her front doorstep. At first, she thought it was work, but then she saw it was Maggie on the caller ID. Once she answered the phone and began to talk, her face lost all expression. It was a detective calling her from Maggie's phone. The entire extended family was sick, bad sick, malicious sick, criminally sick, and the cop had questions for her. He offered to meet her at the hospital, but then he definitely wanted to ride down to the station for a full interview afterwards. By the time she had checked in on her unconscious family, and by the time the interviews were over, it was super late at night. Catherine was devastated. She was shell-shocked. Her face had no expression, and her motions were more like those of a robot going through the rest of tonight on autopilot. When she shut her eyes, she could still hear the beeps of the life support machines and the heart monitors. Maggie had come out of an unconscious state, fighting as hard as she could when she felt Catherine squeeze her hand. Her words were almost incoherent, but she did manage to say something about chocolate cake. That was important to her. But she was delirious, and her skin was blue and pallid. She quickly fell back under. Catherine relayed the words chocolate cake to the detective, and he for sure wrote it down. But he was stone-faced and unreadable in the interview room. Catherine checked the clock by her bed. It was a little after 3 a.m. She glanced up at the book on her shelf. Deep down, she knew what she needed to do. But she fought the impulse. Not tonight, not in this mental state. That night brought about a heavy, exhausted sleep. The kind of sleep brought on by stress or grief when you're still dead on your feet the next day. Catherine called in and took sick leave at work. She had a couple of weeks saved up. Her boss was completely understanding when she explained the situation. Then she was alone in the house with that book. She took a seat on her bed and cautiously opened the book's covers. I know what you're thinking, and I know it hurts. But as a friend, I'm strongly advising you not to proceed. We are friends, right? This got a sort of exhausted smile from Catherine as she ran a hand along one of the pages. Of course. Catherine had taken to speaking to the book aloud, even though it was reading her mind in the transaction. It seemed to enjoy this approximation of conversation. Just tell me what you know, and tell me what my options are. The book processed her request for a moment before the reply came. My best guess is some sort of poisoning. Let me search for a moment, and I can tell you more about the nature of what's happened. The book spent a moment scouring through Catherine's soul. Yes, chocolate cake. You missed a dinner with your sister and her family a few nights ago. They went out to that restaurant you all go to. Let's pry on your soul a little more. You're going to lose an hour here. Sorry about that. Yes, look. This waiter. He waited on all you guys a month ago at your last meetup. Even through this vision, I can see the color of his soul. It's blood red. He's a troubled individual. A dream sequence unfolded. A waking daydream. Catherine was there in the kitchen of this restaurant, only not really. She was like a spectator. It was like replaying a memory she hadn't personally lived. The waiter. What was his name? Eric. His name was on his name tag. As Eric picked up the dessert tray from the kitchen window, he did a sleight of hand and dumped a vial of some sort of dust all over the plates of cake, and then scrambled out to the service floor. He took the cake to the table with Maggie and Catherine's extended family. Catherine snapped back to attention. She looked back at the book. The sun had moved a bit across the sky outside. She definitely lost some time here daydreaming. She stared back at the pages looking for a reason as to why. And the book answered her, as best it understood how to. Heavy metal poisoning. That causes acute permanent organ damage. There's no real coming back from it. The doctors can get the lead acetate or the mercury salts or the arsenic out of you, maybe. But what's done is done. You should call your detective friend and tell him what you suspect. Try to play it cool. Wow, look at that. As hot as your blood is, it's neat that you're not actively seeking vengeance. You do have a noble soul in you, Cat. Let's look at this request. On the matter of fixing your extended family, that's a tall order from me. It's the sort of spell you don't necessarily want to invoke. With that, the book paused and let Catherine handle the real world for a minute. Catherine did call the detective and told him something akin to a half-truth. She said that she had been watching some true crime documentaries on YouTube about heavy metal poisoning, and that one of the waiters down at Monty's Cafe was sort of an odd fellow. Add that to the chocolate cake thing, and maybe there's a motive and a method and a suspect. It was an awkward phone call, but the detective did do a ton of writing in his notebook. She could hear him scribbling on the page, and he promised to follow up. Catherine came back to the book and stopped. The remaining pages were blank. Then she pressed on. Mentally pressing caused more material to appear. She had the means to do something about the situation. Something outside the scope of modern medicine. In her mind, it was wrong, criminal even, not to act. Whatever the cost or danger might be. Okay, look, I'll do it. But I'm not starting that narrative yet. Not until you completely stack the deck in your favor first. Take some aspirin, put some clothes on that you don't mind ruining, drink some water, and get up and walk around and look at the sun. It might well be the last time you get to do so. Then come inside, unlock your front door. That guy you dated a few months ago? Call him up and invite him over out of the blue. At least ensure that you'll be found. This is seriously heavy magic, with very deadly risks. Real wizard stuff. No apple trees or fancy books this time around. Part 8. Prep time. This dire warning prompted a counter-offer from Catherine. Yeah, I'll do all of that. That's fine. But all along you've been talking about magic. Doing magic. Your stories have magic in them. You're saying I'm no wizard. I know you don't do spoilers. But what if I prepare for this encounter? Is that possible? Wizards don't just walk out onto a battlefield. You sit around in your stuffy tower, smoking a pipe, covering yourself in dozens of protective spells. Even your contingencies have contingencies. Then you roll up and do your thing. I don't know magic, but is it possible for me to do something similar and raise my odds of success? Her prompt gave the book pause. Yeah, I don't see why we can't do that. I can't really do spoilers, it's how I'm made. But think heavy combat against the universe itself manifesting in my pages. The absolute worst fight of your life. A spell to do life-saving magic on multiple people is like a brawl with the cosmos. You're going to be fighting the arrow of causality, trying to defy physics. The entities on the other side of my narrative will not be friendly with you. And you can pretty well guarantee that you're going to encounter multiple hostile entities. Do what you need to do in order to prepare for that. Then we may begin. But probably best if someone finds you afterwards anyway, just to be safe. Catherine gave the book a soft stroke of its pages, got up, fetched her purse, and left the house. Her jaw was clenched and her teeth were grinding. She was trembling with a simmering fury that was incredibly dangerous. What tore through her psyche was like a giant middle finger to the whole damn world. But it was righteous anger. She had a cause now. She wouldn't rush this situation, but when she took it on, she was gonna win. She went out and bought a brand new Bluetooth set of headphones and built a playlist of fight music. The Doom theme, some angry black metal music, and anything else she could find under a YouTube search on her phone for quote-unquote pissed-off rock music. She even subbed to YouTube Premium. You can't break your world-ending narrative with ads, after all. Somewhere in all of this, she discovered Deathstep, a genre mixing death metal with dubstep hard drops. A few of those songs got thrown into the mix for good measure. Then she rolled down to an outdoor store in her town. Local laws had a waiting period on handguns, but long guns, provided she could pass a 4473 background check, could come home with her the same day. Obviously, as a mild-mannered librarian, her background check was empty. Out came the credit card, and she left with 2 full ammo cans of preloaded AR-15 magazines, real 5.56 NATO, 100 Magnum slugs for a 12-gauge Benelli shotgun, the long guns themselves, and a bag to keep it all in. The AR rifle was the sort of thing Tactical Ted behind the counter said was good. It had a red dot optic on it. And the shotgun was the sort of thing that would rattle around in the trunk of any given police cruiser in America on any given day. From there, she hit up the hardware store. She bought pipes, cleaning chemicals, and plant food. Catherine had done some dabbling in chemistry. She sat at her kitchen table that night with steel pipes, a drill, some fuses, a kitchen scale, and made a bunch of pipe bombs. She wasn't sure what the universe would send to stop her, but she was pretty sure whatever it was wouldn't appreciate being blown up. Then she recalled the Minotaur from the library scenario. In the apple tree scene, the book had equipped her avatar, her personification in the narrative, with a magic wand. She didn't know any spells, but she still fragged a dude in that story anyway. She closed the book and set it aside on her craft desk. Then she spent several minutes carefully measuring it. If the book was able to read her psyche, certainly she could comprehend what it was thinking in this moment as she got out X-Acto knives and rulers and glue and paintbrushes. Don't worry, I'm not going to cut you specifically, but I need some measurements. Then she sat at her computer and she wrote some arcane-sounding nonsense words. She did them up in big fancy symbolic font and printed out what she dubbed, and entirely believed, were scrolls of summoned Minotaur. Then she cut and formed the printed pages to the same diameter as the paper from her book. After all, she'd worked as a librarian and had to do all of these paper cutouts for promotional material. She had a paper guillotine right there in her house. A quick coat of book glue, and she was adding her own pages to the book. It got her a response on the next blank page. I have never seen someone attempt that before. You entirely believe in it. Magic is, at least in part, about belief. So, yes, those spells will do precisely what you think they'll do once we get started. You're probably still going to die attempting this ritual, but at least your odds of survival just went up. They're not 0 anymore. Catherine put on her most rugged boots and some thick blue jeans. She even threw on some black sunglasses and a trench coat. She was looking like a mix between Sarah Connor and a Matrix character. Then she put all of her supplies in a green golf bag on the coffee table. Just for good measure, she threw in a memo pad as well. A few smaller objects went into the pockets of her trench coat to prevent having to rummage her bag in a fight. To look at the scene without context, one would assume she had just gone postal and should be on a watch list somewhere. It wasn't so far from the truth. The most direct route would be to use all of this stuff on the jackass who had poisoned her family. But the cops were already aware of him and tailing him. He'd get his. Catherine's mission was to make sure her extended family survived his actions. She sent a text message to one of her guy friends, being flirtatious. She'd gone on a couple of coffee dates with him. He seemed nice enough. After a brief back and forth, she asked him to come over. She gave out her address and unlocked her front door, and then took a seat. Her guy friend did agree to come over after work. He didn't know he was doing something tantamount to magical trip sitting or an arcane wellness check, but that was alright in Catherine's mind. If this next story was going to be the end of her, then the social embarrassment wouldn't matter. If she somehow lived, and this dude was cool with it, he might move straight to the top of her list of romantic contacts. For now, though, it was go time. Part 9. The Domain of Death. She put her headset on and cranked that doom music. Then she sat down in a straight-back kitchen table chair in front of her coffee table. Catherine placed the book in her lap and gave it a nod of affirmation. It lingered for just a moment, and then began to generate the chapter title in boldface. Chapter 3. Catherine and the Domain of Death himself. As she zoned into the book, she was overtaken with the phantom sway of riding a boat. Her body was washed with waves that weren't really there, at least not in the physical world. The book began to narrate as all of the objects she'd laid out in preparation vanished from the room, and her eyes rolled back into her head under her glasses. Catherine found herself in a wooden boat, a small craft that could possibly be built in a garage by a handyman with some spare time. She was tossed about on a bleak sea in an endless fog bank. The fog parted, ever so slightly beneath the gray sky, as she washed up to a coast of gray stone. Her mission was simple. Death himself guarded an elixir of life. The underworld was no place for the living, of course. Everyone here, other than Catherine, had one thing in common. They were all dead. And to see the living would only serve to inflame some primal jealousy in them, which, as Catherine came to realize, would happen sooner rather than later. Dotting the gray stone shore were hundreds of skeletons. They stared, motionless, through empty black eye sockets and ancient metal helmets out at the sea. They were wielding weapons of the ancient world, cast in bronze. Daggers, gladius swords, wooden shields, and spears. The dead snapped to attention as they spotted her. One with a feather in his helmet raised a sword high and hissed an otherworldly war cry that sounded like the crunch of thousands of dead leaves in the wind. Catherine's boat had just made contact with the stony shore. She stepped out of it and raised her rifle. A quick flip of the red dot sight on the top rail, and she was painting a slightly magnified sight picture of the nearest skeleton, which was charging her with a spear raised, shield low to its side, looking to run her through as a sort of welcome to hell envoy. She squeezed the trigger and loosed several rounds of hot lead. The 5.56 had no issue piercing the thin bronze and fragile bones. After 5 shots, the skeleton collapsed into a heap of inanimate bones on the beach. Then the realization set in that there were dozens more coming. Catherine began to strafe to the side, keeping the oncoming undead in her sights as she inched further inland. After the 6th skeleton dropped, her bolt locked back. She pressed the magazine release and dropped the mag to the earth. In real combat outside of the book's deadly narrative, she knew she should hang on to that empty magazine. It was like $30 and hard to replace in a war zone. But this whole situation was do or die. No time to be responsible now. She grabbed the next magazine from one of her trenchcoat pockets and shoved it into place. A quick tug of the charging handle, and the rifle was ready to go again. Just as some skeleton looking like an ancient corsair with 2 curved blades got too close. She quickly dispatched him in a hail of bullets, and found a break in the skeleton line. Seizing the opportunity before the next wave got to her, she sprinted up the beach. As she came up the stony uphill slope, she found herself cresting a hill. She stopped and emptied another magazine into the next 6 skeletons who had closed the gap with her. Like before, they collapsed in heaps of bone. As she reloaded, she saw more and more waves of the dead coming down the beach, and what's more, the ones she had gunned down to make her entry, those bones were beginning to swirl around and stand back up. This could, in theory, be an unlimited firefight, with an infinitely large enemy army. They were sort of slow, and she felt thankful that none of them had ranged weapons, but her bullets were finite. Eventually, they'd overwhelm her, and she'd unfortunately end up just like them. At least she could knock them down for now. She continued to run. A little further up the beach was a cove, a place that, in the mortal world, would indicate that the forest had reached the sea. This forest, however, was entirely composed of dead tree trunks and splintered wood, in various states of vitrification and decay. In the edge of this dead forest, Catherine made another stand against the skeletons who had gotten too close. It took half a magazine this time. But more and more were coming out of the fog, in an endless onslaught. Near her right hand was a brick building. It had a door frame, but no door. It also had window holes, but no windows. It was a dilapidated, blown-out brick house. She stepped inside. Within this shell house of a stone structure, there was a staircase leading down. On some instinctive level, Catherine understood she'd have to descend in order to find her prize. So she tipped over a rotten wooden table in front of the doorframe and rushed down the stairs. This was no basement in a quaint little cottage. These stairs sprawled for a short eternity. It felt like she had ran 10 stories down into the darkness in a straight line. What little natural light had come from the place had vanished. But her rifle had a flashlight mounted under the barrel. She clicked it on and continued to run. In the distance, she could hear bones clatter as wood was broken. The echoes reverberated all over the seemingly endless staircase that she was rushing down. She grappled in her head with the concept of death as an infinite rebuttal to the human existence. She was like a candle trying to melt a glacier. But if that was her lot, she was resolved to be the most obnoxious damn candle ever made. In her resolve, the staircase opened up, not to a lower level of a house or a basement, but to a sprawling cavern system. The walls of this cave were coated in some sort of slimy black mold. She made a mental note not to touch it. Sharp rocks protruded at all sorts of aggressive and disorienting angles. She had to slow down and slink between the rocks to avoid cutting up her legs. After each traversal, she'd point her gun into the darkness and sweep the light around. The first few times she saw nothing. On the fourth check, she saw more than nothing. There was a skeleton here, and it was a little different. It was dressed in blue wizard robes. There's no other way to explain the attire. They were ruined blue robes with a black trim on the sleeve and near the bottom. It even had a pointy hat. It raised its bony digits and began to gesture around in the darkness. The hand gestures caused trails of flickering blue light to linger in the air for just a moment. Of course, Catherine already had a gun pointed at skeletal Merlin here, so she simply emptied the magazine into him before he could finish the spell. He collapsed into a heap of bone and robes. Getting creative, before he could get back up, she checked his corpse and found a wooden magic wand. Not so unlike the one she'd had in her first story. She wriggled it around and said some stupid rhyme about light. And suddenly the cave walls all lit up with blue ghost light. She could see the path ahead without having to point a gun at it. Catherine clicked off her underbarrel light, a little shocked that worked as well as it did. Now she could walk around the knee-high and hip-high formations of sharp stones without bumping into or having to slide between them. Most of the gaps were large enough for her to simply step between. Some of the taller pillars of stone did deny her line of sight deeper into the cave, but maybe this was a good thing. By swerving around them, she could deny line of sight to her skeletal pursuers. The opposite side of one of these formations would be the ideal place for an ambush. She reloaded a fresh magazine in the blue light, and then she pressed onward. After the third squeeze between a blockage of tall stones, Catherine's ears picked up frantic footsteps. She had come to a clearing in the cave, a sort of wide spot, with an unknowable fluid dripping down the walls. It wasn't water. From the other end of the clearing, a form stepped into the faint light. There was a massive, hulking, three-headed dog. A hound of hell. A Cerberus, or De-Cerberus, perhaps. All three of his heads wore a spiked collar around their necks. His flesh was decayed and rotten, revealing muscles and bones beneath the black fur, slick with gore. The skin on his mouth had withered away, in the way corpsely skin withers back, causing his razor-sharp teeth to always be visible in a sort of macabre smile. 6 glowing orange ember eyes burned into Catherine. The beast towered over her, perhaps 10 feet tall and several tons in weight. It gave a low growl and lowered its 2 outside heads menacingly, indicating it had every intention to charge. The center head stayed fixed on her, glaring into her very soul. Thinking fast, she raised the magic wand she'd just acquired. If magic was about belief, then she 100% believed she could use magic to stop this massive hellhound. God knows her firearms weren't sufficient to this task. The hellhound rushed her, teeth bare, maws open, ready to take a massive bite out of her. His gullets, plural, were a swirling mass of purple hellish magic. As she focused on the magic wand, she could only think of freeze, and that was seemingly enough. A huge blue ray of magic sprayed from the wooden stick in her hand, like a fire hose of arcane energy. Catherine was no wizard. She felt a massive drain on her entire being as her untrained mind used magic without warding herself beforehand. But that was sort of her entire gimmick right now. She was all offense. Failure meant death anyway. The hound made all sorts of grunting and snarling noises as it slowed mid-charge. Its flesh crystallized. Massive chunks of ice formed all over its hulking body. It had rapidly closed the gap across the wide chasm and gotten into melee range, in spite of Catherine slowly backing up and keeping her wand on the creature. It landed a single bite. The dog's head was more like that of a T-Rex, easily 5 feet from nose to throat, with rows of razor teeth the size of knives and a nasty maw that held God only knows what diseases. Catherine cried out as the bite wrapped around her entire upper body to her waist. Her head was in the creature's mouth, face against its frigid, slimy tongue, as the wand continued to discharge into its body. In the real world, dozens of piercing wounds of various depth opened around her waist, the sides of her torso, and her shoulders and her left arm. And for a moment, she thought this was it. But the creature stopped. A beat passed. She had pumped it with enough ice that it was halted where it was, mid-bite. No chomp, no violent shake that would have torn her in half, no greedy swallowing to consume her mortal flesh. Just a stalemate in this position. Realizing she wasn't dead, she blinked a few times in the fetid maw. Then, using all of her strength, she attempted to pry the massive canine mouth open. It moved, but it moved in slow motion. She had to push her back into the palate of the mouth, maggots falling out of the sickly purple flesh and wriggling all over her skin. Then she had to do something akin to a bench press with both arms against the lower jaw and tongue. Eventually it budged enough that she could duck out of the ravenous maw. She shook off the maggots and took the opportunity to scream in a mix of horror, frustration, and pure adrenaline. The dog wasn't dead. Six Eyes blinked at her. Blinked is maybe not the right word. They dimmed and brightened once more like pissed-off Christmas lights. But the gaze was hot and glaring at her. "I need past you." She pointed at the open door the dog had been guarding. "And I bet you're never going to stop, are you?" It blinked in understanding. The eyes shifted left to right as if to say no. "And this magic will hold you for what? A couple of minutes, tops, until you thaw out?" The ice that had formed the hound into a statue was already beginning to trickle, leaving behind a puddle of water and decayed flesh on the floor. This time the eyes moved up and down. It was hard to tell with the deformed face, but this hellhound was most certainly smiling. It had already taken a bite of her and was eager to get the rest. "Yeah, I was afraid of that. I'm sorry in advance for this." She reached into one of her pockets and brought out a homemade pipe bomb and a cigarette lighter. "But if you're going to make it me or you, we're going to have to see just how shatter resistant you are." The dog's eyes widened in an expression of terror as she rolled the lit explosive under its hulking body. Catherine sprinted past the hound, leaving it to its fate. She was nearly knocked prone by the ear-splitting explosion behind her. Maybe detonating a bomb inside of an enclosed space was a bad idea. Beyond the hound, she staggered to get upright and steady again, finding her path blocked by the massive double door. It was already slightly ajar, but not enough for her to fit through. She grabbed half of it using both hands, leaning with her entire body weight, and forced it open. It was indescribably heavy, like the door of a vault. It scraped with a horrible steel-on-stone sound, like 1,000 nails on 1,000 chalkboards. She eventually got it open enough to pass through the gap. Stepping through the doorway, everything was illuminated on the other side in a spectral green glow. Once she was through, the door closed itself behind her with a condemning thud. Looking out, Catherine realized she was on a circle-shaped balcony made of large stone bricks under her feet. She stepped to the edge, cautious of the lack of handrails. This entire place was a necropolis. Buildings dotted the cavern walls, made on the same black carved stone she stood atop of. Concentric rings went all the way down in an upside-down cone shape. Above her was a stone ceiling. Below, ring after ring, the geometry seemed to narrow towards a center point. Far below, maybe a couple of miles down, was a large structure, like a castle. It had a single bridge for entry, and a moat made out of the same green swirling ectoplasm-like substance that coated all of the walls around her. Catherine could only guess that her prize was in that building. She backed away from the edge, overcome with the horrible sense of vertigo. The cacophony of echoing screams and wails filling the air certainly did no favors to her sense of balance. She had a fair amount of shotgun ammo left, and a magazine and a half left for her AR. But when compared to an entire city population, she figured it was best to try not to fight her way down. Subtlety would be key here. Catherine stepped into a nearby structure, a sort of house, much like the house above that she had entered through. Within this house was something akin to a kitchen with a center table. On opposite sides of this table, two vaguely humanoid-shaped forms stood. These ghostly figures were making loud noises. They were wailing in distinctly different tones, almost as if having a heated argument. The green ghostly figures raised their hands and gestured and pointed and spoke frantically in a series of wails and cries. She couldn't comprehend the words, but it sounded like a married couple arguing. Catherine snuck into another room of the house and found a green sheet. It was soaked in similar ectoplasm to the rest of this place. She quickly threw it on. It had a head and armholes, as if someone had made a really half-assed ghost costume for Halloween. Catherine then slipped back out of the door of the house. The arguing couple, she decided to dub them, never broke their heated debate. Walking back onto the streets, she looked a little more like one of these damned souls. Maybe enough to not rouse suspicion. She studied for a moment and decided to lower her gaze. Most of the people, if you could still call them people here, were looking at their feet. Or at least a spot on the ground where their feet should be. They hovered, well, like ghosts hover, an inch or two above the ground. Catherine couldn't float, but she did her best to blend in, mimicking the same slow, directionless shuffle as the other beings that could observe her. Eventually, she found a large staircase carved into one of the walls and descended. Much like her prior descent, these stairs felt like they went on forever. She was short on breath and had to stop a few times. The staircase, as she discovered, did not continue floor after floor. It wasn't a series of landings, like a mortal high-rise apartment would have in the real world. It terminated on the next ring down, and so it became obvious to her that she was going to have to traverse each ring, find the stairs, and descend further into this place. This is the sort of design the dead would build. They had all the time in the world, after all. Catherine, however, could sense that her time was limited. Her dog bite had begun to burn, and was no doubt infected with who knows what disease. She hurried around this ring as fast as one could hurry while looking directionless and wandering and looking at the ground. More houses, more things resembling businesses, all stone structures inhabited by glowing green entities, all surrounding her with ghostly wails. Another staircase, another trip down, and so the process repeated for what felt like hours. Most people down here were too busy or enthralled or dead to really care about her. She picked up the pace, hurrying more, as much as she thought she could get away with. After what felt like an eternity, she came to the bottom ring. And this is where her stealth mission needed to change tone once more. There were some large entities that Catherine assumed were guards, standing in formation at the start of the bridge. They were humanoid and massive. They sort of looked like skeletons if you covered skeletons in huge slabs of stone armor and gave them 10-foot-long pole arms made out of some sort of black metal that glowed with unholy green energy. Each entity stood about 8 feet tall and had a ghostly green glow to the hollow skeletal eye sockets as it scanned the streets nearby. Catherine made her first pass at this place from the far side of the street, keeping her gaze down, but watching these things from the corner of her eye. To start blasting them with ranged weapons might not be enough. They were bulky and heavily armored. And they were skeletons. No vital organs to hit, even if the bullets made it through the armor. And they likely would not stand still long enough to let her use any of her improvised explosives. Those bombs did have fuses, and fuses took time to detonate. Then she remembered the scrolls she'd prepared. Catherine stepped into a nearby house and rummaged her pockets until she found the scrolls there, pulling them out of extra-dimensional space. She laid them all spread out on the table in this house-like structure. She recited the arcane words with as much conviction as she could find, hands raised above the paper. In this place, they didn't really resemble printer paper anymore, but old parchment with her diagrams on them. All of the symbols began to glow. After a few moments, the scrolls were consumed in unholy blue flame. When the fire abated, she had 6 of the minotaurs from the library there huddled in this house with her. They were even bigger than the guards, all snorting and stamping and looking menacing. You guys are all librarians like me, I hope. She got a nod from the one in front, who after a moment she recognized as the one from her last storybook outing. So there's some big bony assholes just down the street, all covered in armor and looking spooky. They're keeping me from, repossessing a library asset. You guys think you can rough them up while I sneak in and swipe the goods? This got her a thumbs up from several of the bulls, which in turn got a smile from Catherine. She pointed and gave directions. I'm right behind you. And be urgent. This one is several centuries overdue. The bulls, hearing this, all charged out in an armored minotaur stampede. They rushed the skeletal guards and started a massive brawl. Several of the minotaurs had weapons, battle axes, flails, and clubs, which clashed and clanged against the armor and pole arms of the skeletal guards. Not wanting to stick around and see this fight out, Catherine found her opening and ran past one guard who had stepped forward to repel a 2-on-1 minotaur assault. As best she could tell, it hadn't noticed her, or if it had bigger fish to fry right now. The bridge was over what Catherine could now clearly see as a swirling lake of souls. Millions of faces swirled by, all staring back at her, meeting her gaze when she glanced at the fluid below the bridge. A shiver of pure terror ran down her spine, but she pressed on, booking it to the castle itself. Inside, she found the castle to be empty. There were halls and rooms all connecting to one another. The keep was larger inside than it appeared from without. Catherine wandered for what felt like hours. The rooms all had domed ceilings and were well furnished, but no inhabitants stirred in this place, not even the dead. It was surreal, a castle of lonely emptiness. Eventually she found a wide hallway. She had to circle, as best she could tell, all the way from the front entrance to the back exterior corridor of the castle to gain access to this hall. The floor was a checkerboard pattern of white and black tiles. Each tile was painted with a skull in contrasting color to the tile's base color. It didn't appear to be a print. Each one of these skulls had little discrepancies, little quirks of the brush that indicated each tile was made by someone's hands. And judging from the grout, how the lines weren't perfectly straight, each tile was also hand-carved. She was stepping over what felt like thousands of them. I guess this is what you do when you're dead. Side rooms dotted along this central hallway. Catherine hoped against hope that her goal would be simple. There would be some main room and she could just take what she came here for. The magic of this narrative was wearing on her. Her steps were getting weaker as she walked. The path widened into a sprawling room after some time, still keeping with the skull and checkerboard pattern on the floor. And there it sat. There he sat. Up on a massive stone throne was a humanoid. He was a huge glowing skeleton with a spiked crown atop his head. Clad in all black as one would expect of the Grim Reaper. Propped next to his throne was a scythe. He pointed one bony finger at Catherine as she entered the room. Realizing he could see right through her disguise, she attempted to be diplomatic. Catherine knelt on the tile floor, lowering her gaze. The Reaper made a hand gesture up, indicating he wanted her to rise. He didn't open his mouth, but he flipped a palm face up at her, then pressed it to the side of his skull where an ear would be, as if he were listening. Catherine rose and gave a polite bow, more like a martial artist would do. Death wanted to hear what she had to say. I'm so sorry to bother you. I know this is no place for the living. My family is dying, and they're all dying suddenly from a senseless act of poisoning. I have reason to believe you have an elixir in your possession that can cure disease. Would you be willing to part with it, and if so, what might I offer in exchange for it? Catherine stopped and listened. Her words hung in the air for almost too long. The Reaper rubbed his chin bone with an index finger as those massive black eye holes pierced Catherine's soul. Then he raised a bony hand, one index finger up as though he had an idea. He snapped his fingers, and then Catherine heard the rattle of bones. More of these skeletal guards stepped out, walking slowly and with intent. They came from both her left and from her right. A glance over her shoulder and Catherine noticed that more guards had filed in behind her, blocking a retreat back down the massive hallway. For a moment, she thought they were going to attack her, but then the unexpected happened. The crowd of guards at her left parted, and one in slightly ceremonial clothing stepped forward. He held a large, black stone chest in his hands, and he sat it before the Reaper, bowed and backed away, not turning his back on the Death God. When he was back in formation, the Reaper made another hand gesture. The chest opened, and up floated a glass bottle. Inside was a glowing potion. It was red to pink to green to blue to white to black to purple, and emitting bright, blinding rays. Around it sat a bubble of magical energy. Death raised his hand, and the bottle floated several feet up. Catherine didn't quite understand. She took a step to approach, but this caused all of the guards to raise their weapons. She took that as her cue to stop, and she watched. Then the Reaper pointed at a crowd of guards that had come from Catherine's right. The crowd of armored skeletons parted like the Red Sea. From the center of the pack stepped a skeleton in very ornate armor. It held a walking stick with a glowing orb at the end. No, a magic staff. It had a huge flowing black cape over its dark gray metal attire. It plodded forward, gave the Reaper a bow of respect, and then placed itself between Death and Catherine. I don't understand. I'm sorry. Part 10. The Duel. I don't understand. I'm sorry. The skeletal wizard looked up at Death. Death smashed a fist into an open palm, and then pointed at Catherine and his newfound mage. The wizard began to speak. His jaw didn't really move like one would expect, but a flicker of green soul stuff emitted from the gaps in his teeth, flashing like a sound visualizer on each word. The boss doesn't speak in the presence of mortals. To do so would instantly kill you. He wants you to know he's impressed you've made it this far. This level of determination from a mortal is not something he sees often. And he is delighted with the spectacle you've provided up to this point. But he desires one more act, a show for his entertainment. He will give you the elixir of life if you can best me in single combat. Should you fail, of course, both your life and the lives of your family you're attempting to save are void. In the real world, Catherine was already convulsing in her chair. Foam was running down her chin from her open mouth. The magical book subtly nudged her hands a few inches to keep from getting drool on its pages. Then the story continued. So a one-on-one then. My magic against yours. Do you have a name, duelist? The skeletal battle mage shrugged. Not anymore. Not in a language that's meaningful to you. I am an elite death guard. If a nickname suits you, then how about DG? Not original, but it was better than nothing. Very well, DG. I am Catherine Grace, and we shall duel now for your master's pleasure. She fetched her rifle from over her shoulder. Delightful! I don't get out much. Tell me of your magic staff. What do you call it? She raised an eyebrow. This? Oh, I call it a boomstick, and its magic is strong. From the more seasoned death guards, this did get some muffled laughter. And then the fight began. Catherine raised her AR and painted a clean sight picture of the skeletal magic user. DG was some sort of armored mage. He had a magic staff and heavy armor. It was like taking aim at a turtle or armored beetle. As she did so, he raised his hands and began to chant an incantation, causing the area around him to warp and distort as though viewed through curving steam. Catherine loosed half a dozen rounds. The rifle, in spite of the high muzzle velocity of the bullets, fired light projectiles. The recoil was negligible. No huge muzzle rise, no bouncing front sights or trying to wrestle the gun back to place follow-up shots. It truly was a pleasure to shoot. But the bullets, in spite of making impacts squarely on DG's face and neck and around his collarbone, did very little to the entity. The lead flattened out upon impact and left some minor singes and burn marks across the skeleton's head and upper body armor. In response, DG loosed a bolt of green swirling energy that crashed into Catherine like a flood. It hurt. It hurt a lot. But it didn't hurt in a way like a cut or scrape or burn or impact. The sensation was unlike any pain she'd ever felt before. Her joints popped and cracked. Her form slumped, making it difficult to keep the creature in her sight picture. Hell, for that matter, making it difficult to even stay upright. She tasted the nasty tang of copper pennies in her mouth, and felt an obstruction. Catherine looked over the butt of her gun and she spat, spitting out nearly an entire mouthful of teeth on the stone floor, roots visible and gory. She wanted to cry out, but understood to do so would serve little purpose. It was just this coil of terror and stress building in her chest like the mechanism of a clock. Her heart raced at full speed and palpitated as it skipped beats. She continued to fire more rounds as DG unleashed yet another blast of unholy magic. All at once, her rifle emitted an ineffective click as the slide locked back. It was empty, but more, it felt weird in her hands. The entire gun decomposed into dripping masses of liquid, as if someone had mixed a ton of gallium with the aluminum of her rifle. Streams of blob-like room-temperature metal dripped down her arms, as flakes of rusted metal slowed off and fell to the floor and scattered on an unseen breeze. She understood in that moment, though she couldn't quite put it into words, what she was fighting against. It was the inevitable. This wizard wasn't a wizard like the one she fought before. He was the embodied march of time. People and animals and plants aged and died. Structures crumbled. Money depreciated. Knowledge eventually became useless without someone to act upon it until it faded away. Her enemy used the human condition itself as a weapon. As an undead, DG almost certainly existed outside of the cycle of life and death, outside of the arrow of time. But Catherine, being alive and corporeal and fleshy, had to obey these hard-coded rules of the universe. What was she, with all of her rage and her learning and her tools, to stand up against such a being, such a manifestation of a concept? This is what the book had put her into conflict with. A fight against what might as well be a universal constant. It was shaped, vaguely, like a person, and yet it was so much more. She caught her first break, but it didn't feel like much of a break in the moment, when Death himself snapped a finger. The floor shook. The alternating pattern of black and white tiles, with hand-painted skulls on them, began to rise. Pillars, square in shape, 10 feet tall, with dimensions by width and length the same as the floor tiles, sprang up violently, shaking, levitated by unholy magic. The Reaper was producing a maze, a game of cat and mouse with her. Catherine was unable to shoot through solid stone, not that it mattered with her rifle ruined. But it seemed her enemy couldn't do so either. The blasts of unholy magic ceased. Around her, in this newly formed room, she could hear the distinctive sound of DG's metal sabatons, dry bones within them crunching across the floor. Each footfall was a metallic beat against the heavy stone. He was methodical, slow, and intent in his purpose. This wasn't a proper duel. She was being hunted. Catherine fled through the newly formed maze, distancing herself and dropping to her knees at some distance from the marching magician. She thought for a moment, grasping, fighting with the ache in her body and the difficulty of her motion. Her mind was fogged. Both with adrenaline and with whatever foul magic this creature had subjected her to. But somewhere in the murk, she had a thought, an idea, an inspiration. It was dim, like a candle beneath a sea of black ink. But it slowly emerged and broached the surface of her conscious thought. Prior to starting this story, she had written scrolls, as herself. Not in this projection in narrative space. It was all about intention. About the concentrated force of her will in opposition to the nature of the universe. That's what this all had been. Every narrative the book created was full of peril and potential to die. It was tapping her mortal soul and comparing her to the immutable laws of the universe and the material cosmos. That's why it hurt. It was friction. It was grinding her against logic as it was understood. That's why this particular story was so hard. But if the book was a conduit for her intention, for her will against the universe, and it wasn't about esoteric ritual or arcane words or gestures, then maybe, just maybe, she had a dim flicker of hope. Catherine rummaged her pockets and came up with a small spiral-bound notebook. It was a tiny thing, not much larger than a credit card. It was the sort of thing you'd hastily scrawl a grocery list onto. As the steps came closer, she grabbed her pump-action shotgun from her bag and laid it horizontally on the ground in front of her. Then she tore a single piece of yellow and blue-lined paper from her notebook. She had no clue where her pen was. Catherine groaned in agony, and then she spat a mouthful of her own blood onto the paper. Using a finger, she hastily drew a stick figure, an entity with wings and horns, much like you'd imagine a devil to look like. Magic needed some sort of activation word, she supposed, so she wrote in her own blood using a fingertip. And then, no sooner than she had formed the letters, she spoke aloud. Badass. This act caused the story to pause for a moment. It started a back and forth with the book on another layer of narration, inside of Catherine's inner monologue. The book was a little confused. It looks like you're trying to do a metamorphosis. That might be possible. Once you pull the trigger on this, there's no going back. Yes, absolutely, do it. If I don't do something, I'm going to die down here. Catherine's inner monologue was frantic. The book calculated. For the book, it was only a moment. For Catherine, it was less than a second. But the book, in that time span, looked forward years into the future. It rummaged the corners of Catherine's mortal soul. It was counting and tallying her potential. I think I might have misjudged you. There's a tremendous amount of raw potential in here. I said before there were no wizards left in this world. But I think if there ever was going to be one in this day and age, it would be you. You're just missing the formal training. Let's tap into that. Let's get you a hookup. But we're going to need to talk when you're done. The game's changed. Catherine suddenly was snapped back to the reality of the marching Death Guard. She was engulfed in unholy black flames as she touched her shotgun again. The improvised scroll erupted in the same fire, consuming the page. In the real world, Catherine self-immolated. Her body burst into fire in her living room, setting off the smoke detector of her house. Thousands of runes and glyphs and symbols inscribed themselves in a sphere-shaped pattern with her at the center of it, burning all into the wall and the drywall and the shelving and her television set and the furniture. They faded from red to orange to black, leaving smoke trails everywhere. When the flames cleared within the story, what stood was vaguely humanoid, but only just. The gun had fused to her arm, truncated at the elbow with the gun barrel. The shape of the shotgun had changed, its bore growing massive in diameter to the size of a grapefruit. The weapon looked like a bulbous, eyeless head with a wide-open mouth, and the barrel protruded from the teeth of the metallic mouth. Catherine's body manifested a stone-like exoskeleton, not so unlike what the Death Guards were doing. Hers was made of dancing magma of red-hot passion, pulsing through black obsidian where once skin had been. A row of massive teeth formed around Catherine's neck like a collar, almost like an upward-pointing necklace of black razor-sharp shark teeth. The ground and nearby pillars had erupted into flames in Death's domain. As they fizzled back to solid stone again, DG stepped around the corner. He had his magic staff raised. The skeletal being suddenly froze in place. He saw more than a mere mortal in front of his eye sockets. "What did you—" And before he could ask, with his dry, raspy voice, Catherine raised her gun arm and loosed a barrage of hellfire. The blast shattered the skeleton's armor and sent him flying backwards around the corner. It was night and day. If her rifle did next to nothing to DG, then this new weapon and this new form hit him like a battering ram. The Death Guard slid down the opposite wall, like a more messy cartoon collision. He didn't squash and stretch like a cartoon. He simply began to crack and break. The air was ripe with the sound of splitting stone armor and cracking ribs. He found himself kneeling on one leg, one hand sprawled out on the floor. DG made a hand gesture. All of the stone pillars slid back into the floor. The marauding skeletons all took a step back in shock as their gaze landed on what Catherine had transformed herself into. Even Death himself leaned forward on his throne. He stared hard at the fight unfolding before him, green necromantic energy seeping and spilling from DG's armor onto the floor, making pools. DG managed to get to one foot, spitting out a mouthful of ectoplasm as he rose. "Perhaps I misjudged you, mortal." He got his grasp around his staff with bony hands and tried to get steady, leaning on it for support. Not wanting to disappoint his master, he raised a hand and began to weave another spell, slowly. It was imprecise, like the writing of a drunkard. The lingering after images in the air were like watching a strobe light or a high-speed video. Catherine didn't let him finish whatever he was casting. She blasted him again with her newly formed gun arm. He fell this time 15 or 20 feet away, and he didn't rise. There was some motion from the pile of bones as he attempted to get stable. Then a feeble rattle and clack of bones, as he was too far gone to get back to his feet. Catherine stared at him. The vaguely humanoid figure made of hard black razor stone was peering at the pile of busted bones on the floor so hard, her gaze itself was burning down on the combatant. When she was entirely sure he wouldn't rise, she lowered her gun arm and cast her gaze up at Death. The Reaper sat there for a moment. Then a dry hiss, a hollow sound, a terrifying noise never intended for mortals, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. He was laughing. The Reaper thought this entire display was the funniest damn thing he'd seen in centuries. He gestured with one hand. The massive bony figure had to grasp his ribs with the spare hand to keep from losing them of what would otherwise be a belly laugh in a more fleshy creature. As he gestured, the floating orb of magic stopped in front of Catherine, or the entity who had previously been Catherine. It cracked like an eggshell. The glass vial inside, glowing in all the colors of the rainbow, landed in her black stony palm. She looked at it, then at Death. Then she collapsed to the floor as the adrenaline rush ended. She found herself on the floor of this castle, ravaged by necromancy. Ravaged even further by her own fiery transformation. As reality cut to black, she remembers grasping that vial in a vaguely fetal position for all that she was worth. And so the world faded. Part 11. The Aftermath. Catherine found herself in a void. Reality was in third person. She was floating in what was tantamount to starless space. She still had that elixir in her hand, but looked much more normal now, and less like an entity of fire and stone. Her entire body was covered in scar tissue, as if she'd been through some horrific fire. She was so severely burned that her head was bald. But somehow the frames, not the lenses, of her glasses were intact. She adjusted them out of force of habit. After some time, maybe seconds, maybe weeks floating in this abyss, she spoke. "Book, are you here?" Words began to manifest on reality, as if someone were writing on the universe itself. It was the book's typeface. "Yeah, I'm here." Catherine was confused. She had a million questions. But the most pressing floated to the top first, like the first wave sloshing over an overfilled dam. What happened? "You won. Your sister is going to live. I don't need to tell you, but you're all messed up in the real world." That guy friend you invited over walked in when he smelled smoke and burning flesh. He saw what happened to you, what you were doing, and fled the scene. He did make a 911 call. A bunch of first responders are about to pull up into your driveway in the real world. There was a pause. "Okay. I spooked a guy. I got the elixir. Magic has a cost. Am I dead?" That was the next question she could form, and it seemed important, too, given the circumstance. The book hesitated. "It's difficult for me to explain, but I'll do my best. In the classical sense, yes and no. It's complicated." Catherine sighed. Then it dawned on her this place had no air. but her chest still did the slow inhale and exhale motion. The book's explanation was clear as mud. You said we needed to talk later, and something about wizards. What happens now? The book could answer that question. Catherine recalled the tally marks. That is a scorecard. And 46 times now, I've been at this state with a mortal. I think if you were anyone else, it would go up to 47. Think of this as like being, to use human anatomy, in my mouth, but not swallowed yet. But you're a weird one. I don't think I want to eat you. I think I'm really not supposed to, on some fundamental design level that I can scarcely articulate. Catherine took a pause at that reply, letting it sink in. Well, I'm glad you're not eating me. I appreciate that. What happens now? Your soul is beyond a doubt some sort of mage-born. Maybe a sorceress, maybe a witch. I'm not sure precisely. But something with magic. You're one of the ones labeled no touch by cosmic influences beyond your present comprehension. I don't think you get a normal afterlife like most humans do. To keep with our analogy, I guess this is where I say I'm going to spit you out and let you settle up with your deity. But I don't think settling is in the cards for you, Catherine. What I do know is that your physical body is beyond the salvation of your doctors. It's basically destroyed. You're untethered now. As the book explained this, Catherine saw her living room in the third person. A burned-out corpse sat, chin to chest, on the wooden chair, as choking black smoke rose from it. The sight was beyond surreal, putting her at a loss for words. It was like someone had burned a witch at the stake. She had to reel from that revelation for a long moment before she asked something else. Okay, well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? The book thought and processed for a long moment. Well, the Reaper just got one of his favorite death guards absolutely trounced by a will that I, and he, and nobody else really knew that you had. I'd say that's one hell of a job application if you wanted to work for him. That story was more real than you know, love. I think maybe you go do that now. You wait for some mortal's time to be up, pop up, be the polite librarian, usher them over to the other side. And if they refuse to go, then you turn into that thing and make sure that they go. Maybe take a vacation to other worlds, wander the universe for a bit. You've met the Minotaurs. Humans aren't the only intelligent life out there. It'll be a whole lot less boring than waiting for the microwave in the library to finish your soup. This got a slight smile, if Catherine was able to smile. Her intention was to smile, at least. I might just go do that. And what about my sister and her family? The book manifested a series of X-rays in response to that question. In the first one, there was all of this black necrotized tissue on a whole bunch of different organs of a chest and abdomen X-ray. 4 of them were laid out side by side, and they were all in some state of decay. Then it animated a time-lapse of the same X-rays in a diagram. When the image stopped distorting, all of the X-rays looked pristine. Catherine noticed she was no longer holding the glass vial in this place, in this in-between. They're gonna be just fine. Your family won't know precisely what you did, but given your mysterious death and their miraculous recovery they're making on the same day, they'll know beyond a doubt that you did something. After a moment of leaving Catherine in stunned silence, the book continued. This was a lot of fun. I knew you were a good read. I just didn't perceive how good. After all of this, I have spent a lot of magic, and I am absolutely starving. So this is where you and I part ways. and I go find someone who doesn't know what they're getting into. I'll put in the good word for you on the other side of reality. I know people and entities and things. The Reaper's going to take a few days to show up. In the meantime, that guy who poisoned your family, you can go give him one hell of a haunting. And with that, the book vanished. To anyone who didn't know, it was as if the fancy brown leather book never existed. To ask one of the paramedics on the scene, after enough rounds of drinks, he'll explain how he saw a vaguely humanoid, vaguely female shape salute him from the corner of his vision on the night he worked that case. But only with enough drinks. He doesn't like talking about how he felt in that moment. Something was just incredibly unnatural. Something prickled the primordial fears in his brain in a way that those fear sensors didn't like to be prickled. Maggie and her family made recoveries that were nothing short of a miracle. In fact, Maggie was well enough to sob her eyes out on Catherine's coffin before the funeral even came around. Deep down, she always knew her sister had done something, but could never come to terms with precisely what the hell had happened that day. She went on to raise her 2 kids and threw Catherine's name out years later as the name for her grandchild. Somewhere in a musty store that was a mix of coffee shop and second-hand bookstore, a fellow with a man bun clutched his espresso drink. A TV in the corner of the shop was chattering in the background about a long-time poisoner in the town being arrested and held in a psych ward. Something about a haunting. The guy on the TV was ranting and raving about a flaming witch with a gun arm chasing him as he was dragged out of a restaurant and into a cop car. People these days are crazy. Robert tuned out the chatter as he browsed for some cheap reading to pass the time and to sound smart to his friends. A leather-bound book fell, all on its own, from 2 shelves up and landed in his arms here in this second-hand bookstore, and it sprawled open from the impact. "Hello, Robert! Would you like to play a game with me?" Well, there you have it. If you're still here with me in the outro, thank you so much. This story took me about a week to write. I hope all of you guys had as much fun listening to it as I did making it. This time around I opted for a third-person perspective. Let's be honest, I have all my tech tricks. I can put my lion mask on. But I'm not a female voice actress. Since I am in the original writing and narration game now, maybe one day I can give all you guys a crossover episode. You know, plop a few characters into a new narrative, do a mega creature feature. If that's something you'd like to see, definitely hit me up about it. And remember, like and subscribe while you're down there. It would mean the world to me if I could do this as a day job. It takes me anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to write a new story, get it narrated, get it edited, and get it uploaded. But I try to make it a point to make your weekend just a little bit comfier and a little bit darker, dear listener. If you happen to be a writer in this space, and you want me to narrate one of your stories, or really for any inquiry about the channel, shoot me an email at liondadstorytime@gmail.com. Well, I guess this is where we part ways for now. But the outro card should have a recommendation for you if you just can't get enough of these chill, spooky narratives. Until next time, have a wonderful week, listener.